Okay, I'm going to turn it over to our team that visited Miami-Dade College.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right, well, good afternoon and welcome. We are really excited to be here to be able to present to you what we learned from our colleagues at Miami-Dade College. Before we get started, I'll just let you know who we are. My name is Laura Lucas, and I'm an instructional designer.
Allison Judy, student government president. Can you hear me?
It's on.
Hi, I'm Josh Beach. I'm in the English department and also be teaching the new student success course in the spring.
Angelica Diaz Miranda. I'm an advisor over at Riverside. Can you hear me now? Okay. Angelica Diaz Miranda. I'm a Riverside advisor.
Hello, I'm Grant Potts, and I'm a department chair for philosophy, religion, and humanities.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Marquez. I'm in the financial aid office. I'm a specialist.
I'm Kelly Stockstad, assistant professor of speech at the Cypress Creek campus.
Right. And in addition to the group you see here, we were also joined on this trip by Soon Mers, board member Jeffrey Richard. I'm looking around. Dr. Cook was with us. Mike Midgley was on that trip as well. So we had a great group that went out there. Miami-Dade is about 5 years into their transition to a guided pathways model. And so we were very fortunate to be able to learn from them, from their experiences, their reflections on, and I will say that these are their words and not mine, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we heard it all. At our site visit, we had the opportunity to visit with a wide range of people from across the institution. So that was everyone from the provost and vice provost, faculty, advisors, student services staff members. So we had an opportunity to really understand their process and their experience from a lot of different perspectives. We also had the opportunity to learn about some of their higher profile programs. We toured a couple of these facilities, including the Magic, which is a brand new facility for their animation and gaming department, and the Culinary Institute, which was very impressive, though unfortunately did not include samples, so can't speak to that. A little bit more about Miami-Dade College, and you'll see on the far right column, you'll see comparative numbers for Austin Community College. Miami-Dade College is the largest institution of higher education in the country. 7 campuses and 3 centers. They have 160,000 total enrollment, so that's any student that they serve in any capacity. 67,000 degree-seeking students. Their students are 90% minority. 38% are attending full-time. 67% low income. 70% are employed while attending classes. And then the bottom one I'll explain, their 13 to 39% is a range for their various programs, and that was at the start of their Pathways project. The number you see for ACC, the 4%, is a 3-year completion rate for the fall 2008 cohort, and that's programs combined. So just wanted to explain what you see there. These are the 8 meta majors that they have at Miami-Dade College. They refer to their guided pathways as Shark Path. A shark is their mascot, so it does make sense. But they call it Shark Path. Important to know about Miami-Dade is that their transition to guided pathways was actually mandated by the Florida State Legislature. So in 2013, they passed a bill that required the State Board of Education to identify a set of meta majors that all schools within the Florida college system would adhere to. So these meta majors you will see statewide in schools that are in the Florida college system. And those meta majors are arts, humanities, communication and design, business, education, health sciences, industry, manufacturing and construction, public safety, STEM, and social and behavioral science and human services. Miami-Dade describes their guided pathways as having 3 main components. And so these will all be hit on in much more detail when my colleagues speak about the various phases of that we'll be looking at. But just to give you an overall picture and kind of so help you understand how they will fit together. The first major component is 3-tier advising. This ranges from pre-college advising at the high school level, academic and career advising when students enter Miami-Dade, all the way through coaching and mentoring, which is where students transition to a faculty mentor later in their pathway. The second major component is course sequence guides. So these are the actual sequence of courses that students take, logically ordered. And one of the main points that they talked about with their course sequence guides is that they all include a math, an English, and an applied course within their pathway, all in the first semester. And they did that intentionally so that students will not leave math and English until the end, where they can often get in trouble. And also that they have an opportunity in that applied class to have some experience within their chosen pathway and make sure that it's a good fit. The third major component is communities of interest. So these would be networks of students, faculty, staff, advisors, community members even, who share similar interests. They are aligned with the meta majors. Within these communities of interest, they would host events and networking opportunities to promote student engagement and persistence. So each of these three components is kind of layered upon one another to create a holistic experience for those students within their pathway. So how did they do the work of creating these pathways? I think the big answer to that is that they had to implement change on multiple levels. So the first and more obvious task is kind of the academic side of it, the development of the course sequence guides. They described this as a faculty-driven process that was heavily informed by advisors. So within this process, departments would nominate faculty members to lead those discussions within their groups. And advisors were included on all course sequence development teams in order to kind of inform that process and provide insight from their unique perspective on the student experience within those pathways. They found that professional development, and I will say that they admitted that they found this out trial by fire style, providing professional development in soft skills, and that's things like managing different difficult conversations, negotiating, things like that. They found that it was really helpful to provide that professional development for their team leaders before they went into these conversations. So they were able to step in and really manage the discussions that were happening and ultimately bring people within their divisions to consensus. So that was one of their lessons learned, I would say. And finally, in terms of developing the course sequences, collaboration with transfer institution faculty, they found really critical. And by collaboration, I mean intense, direct, face-to-face, put them in the same room type of collaboration. So they actually talked about bringing math faculty from partner four-year institutions to sit in the same room with their math faculty and let them figure out what are the courses, what are the learning outcomes, and how can we create the best alignment so that for the student, it's a seamless transition from one institution to the next. Now, in addition to the academic change that had to happen with these course sequence guides, they also really had to go about implementing some institutional level change, one of which is deeper integration of academics and student services. You will hear this and see this in pretty much everything that will be discussed later on. We all kind of walked away remembering them telling us the phrase, faculty advise and advisors teach. So they've developed through some of their initiatives a really close working relationship between academics and student services, and that kind of creates, again, a more unified and simple experience for the student. On a more logistical level, they also found that they had to reorganize some of their college services and practices in order to support the pathways design. And a real obvious example of that was predictive scheduling. So they had to make sure that when they were offering courses, when they were offering certain sections, actually aligned with when those courses fell in their course sequence guide. So if that was recommended for second semester, they needed to make sure that they loaded that semester with options for the student and maybe not so much in the previous semester. So things like that. What we really learned from that is that, they found it wasn't strictly an academic change. This was a real thorough institutional change. So with that, we'll talk about some of the major initiatives that Miami-Dade has looked at or taken on, and we'll see how they align to the 4 phases in the Texas Completes framework.
So they're doing some really unique and effective things in their outreach to high schools. They're not approaching the high school outreach as simply, we want your students, recruiting students. They're approaching it as, we are someone that can help you do your job better, You are people that can help us do our job better. So it's more of a interaction among equals and a sharing relationship. So they really spend time developing relationships with the administrators and faculty at area high schools. And they do a lot of data sharing, which is mutually beneficial to both parties. And they use this data in order to better target their recruitment and outreach to these schools, and they're able to more effectively bring in a lot more students into Miami-Dade College. It also allows them to kind of customize their approach to different area schools to understand who those unique students are, what their unique needs may be. And as you can see here, that they have 90% of their applicants are coming from these area schools, which is a pretty large number, reaching 53 area high schools. So a very proactive outreach system here that they're really trying to advise both the faculty at the high schools and also the students themselves. And so they're not simply going to a campus to try to recruit students. They're there to help students understand the transition process, the application process, and they're setting up a case management system where they're kind of targeting each individual with a folder so they know each individual's progress. And so when they're going to campus, they're establishing these individual relationships with students in order to help them to make sure that they are progressing along the path. And when they're missing documents or not fulfilling certain steps, they're able to target that to the individual student. So they really get in there early to establish these relationships with the high school faculty and staff and with these students in order to get that process going well before deadlines in order to apply to the school. Ideally, they're looking for students to apply in the spring while they're still in high school, and that's enabling them to get a lot more students to get registered. They're using the data, as I mentioned before, to really target the individual needs, to understand those individual students, and again, to take that case management approach so that each student has a different mentor looking out for them, walking them through step by step the forms and thinking about books and classes and helping them choose the best classes for them. They also do some interesting college-ready programs, which include a summer boot camp where they actually have a week-long orientation type event where they bring the diagnostic tests to the students rather than have the students come to the college to do those diagnostic tests. They also bring the advisors to the students. And they're also kind of team building and getting them involved in the application process and just making them very aware of what they need to do in order to be college ready. And so by the time fall comes around, they're all registered, they have their classes, they have their books, they know exactly where their classes are located, they're ready. And so it's a really kind of individualized approach that's very effective. And they also have orientations where they're holding larger meetings at area high schools before these boot camps in order to kind of make students aware of the process and kind of just getting everyone involved and networking together and kind of taking that team approach.
So students are, upon entry, students are required to participate in an online 45-minute orientation that includes an assessment of general psychological issues such as resiliency and motivation. After students have completed this assessment, they move on to a course or a campus orientation that is 3 hours long. And during this orientation, it's required for direct entry students. During this orientation, students meet and interact with various representatives from student services, take an assessment to determine what was retained from that online assessment, and then focus on information that they had lost. At that time, they also select a main campus and are assigned an advisor who is knowledgeable about that individual student prior to their face-to-face meeting. Students also leave that orientation with their first year schedule complete and in hand. Students who are unclear about their certain career path, they have a focus assessment that they take called Focus 2 to help guide them to where they want to go. Case management is campus-based for student convenience. Here, students are required to meet with their assigned advisors face-to-face. The direct entry students are the ones who do that during their campus orientation. All the other students can do it there. If they do not meet with their advisor, and a hold is put on registration so they can't register for a class until they meet with their advisor. Advisors have a checklist that include what math and English course students took in high school so that they are able to put them in the correct class that first year. Advisors also engage in intrusive advising for non-cognitive issues to match college resources to the needs of the student, which are taken from that initial online assessment. And based on those results, the advisor is able to connect the student with services such as transportation, child care, or academic support. Advisors and students also create their customized academic plan, which confirms their program of study, allows the student to declare their transfer institution if they so desire, which allows the advisor to give them more of a guided way towards the school's agreement plan, articulation agreement. With their meta majors, advisors incorporate group advising. And then finally, each student is enrolled in a first-year experience course, which is their version, or first-year experience, which is their version of the student success course that we do here. Here, students learn about transitioning to college, study skills, time management, career exploration, college policies, and financial literacy. The course is offered as an elective credit, which ranges from 1 to 3 credits, and it's based upon math and English placement. Currently, the college is considering organizing the first-year experience courses around meta majors, but it hasn't gone past discussion as of yet.
So in the advising sequence, initially advising will be career advising and advising. That's kind of like what would be general advising here. But after 25% completion, after that 25% benchmark in most programs, most students are going to transition to what they call coaching and mentoring. And the coaches and mentors, while they're still oriented on kind of monitoring the students' progress and intervening where that's necessary, are also very much trying to orient the students on completion and on what they're doing after completion. So in addition to advising them about their course sequence and helping them complete their degree, they're also trying to help connect them to internships and other opportunities to develop in their fields. The coaching and mentoring model, when they talked about this very much as faculty mentoring, and that seems to be where they're moving. Right now they have 300 faculty mentors. That's 40% full-time faculty, 40% of their coaching and advising is done by full-time faculty. The other 60% are department chairs and then program-specific advisors that they had in place already. But that's their direction they're definitely going. One thing that I think is really important to understand about the mentoring process, in addition to kind of the orientation on completion and on making those connections after completion, is that they had a strong connection between traditional advising and the faculty mentors. Every faculty mentor had a buddy that they were assigned to. They had a specific senior advisor that they were connected to. They would shadow that senior advising as part of their training, and they would have that senior advisor as a resource. And in addition, the senior advisor would have that faculty member as a resource for understanding what was important about that specific program. And I think this is a lot of what seems to be leading to success, is that interaction between advising and the faculty mentoring. Right now, the faculty mentoring model is purely voluntary. It's voluntary for faculty on whether they participate or not. They're not paid for this. They do have a caseload system where they have a 30-student caseload. And for the student to participate in terms of, they're assigned a mentor, but in terms of whether they go and visit that mentor to get advising, it's up to them to do so. They have had issues of low participation. They only have about 12,500 of their 67,000 degree-seeking students in the faculty mentoring right now. And in addition to that, the faculty mentors report relatively low student engagement, so they're looking at ways to address this. For example, faculty mentors now have the ability to put a hold on the student's schedule if they see like a red flag issue that won't be removed until that student makes an appointment to meet the mentor. So they won't be able to actually enroll, or they won't be able to sign up for classes until they've done that advising piece. In addition to the mentoring part of their work to get students through. I think the other part that's really important for getting students through is their course sequence guides. I mean, we've already talked about the course sequence guides, and what's key about these, I think, is that they are really in a logical, clear course order. They emphasize that a lot of what they were really trying to do is to create sequences that students could understand, that really built on each other and were oriented around what the program needed and how the skills stack in order for the student to successfully complete the program. Another important part, as we mentioned before, was that this was a second place where you had strong faculty engagement. The faculty course sequence guides were built in the programs, although in all those programs, when they were building the course sequence guides, they always had at least one person from student service as the small teams. They started with very small teams looking at these course sequence guides, and then they would take them out to the disciplines and rework them with the disciplines. So you have a small team building it of faculty members with someone from student advising or other student services, and then other faculty members and members of the program engaging with it. They had clear course descriptions. You know, you had a real strong sense of exactly what your prerequisites are. Now, there's a couple other things that I think are also important. One is that they use default scheduling. What does that mean? It means that in a particular meta major, you would be given a schedule, and that there's a default schedule you would follow. So even though you may have any number of classes that could satisfy, say, your social and behavioral science requirement in a certain pathway, that might be psychology, if that was deemed it was appropriate for that. That doesn't mean the student has to take psychology. It just means that unless they elect to change it to another one, that defaults for them. So they still have choice, but they're given something to make a choice from and to make sure that they are getting a clear schedule. I mean, they're basically handed their schedule for the first year, and then they can adjust it as they see appropriate. So it does reduce the amount of confusion about decision-making students will have. The second thing is, as they were working through the course sequence guide, they really looked at where they could match in that default scheduling what was appropriate for the program. And I think the best example here is in math. In looking at non-STEM fields, they tried to find what are the appropriate math courses that will fulfill what we want in college math without necessarily requiring college algebra, but are getting the type of math that's appropriate for that program of study.
And so in understanding the clear course schedules, they also wanted to make sure that students understood that they were monitoring the students' progress as well, so just making sure that they are staying on track. And part of that began with clear academic requirements. So the Department of Education pre-arranges the requirements for financial aid to be a 2.0 GPA and a 67% completion rate. And while many colleges create their own institutional standards, what Miami-Dade did was they actually combined the institutional and financial aid standards into one standard for the students, which creates a clearer understanding of the expectations for each of the students so they understand what progress looks like. They also made sure that students who were referred into a developmental education program were enrolled in a success course equivalent to the number of areas in which they were referred into. So if a student was referred into math and writing, for example, then they would have to enroll in a 2-hour success course. Now, other things that they had to do was create interventions to make sure that students stay on track. So one of those things is just making sure that if the student doesn't meet their academic requirements, that they're enrolling in a student success course, just to make sure that they're, again, following up with those non-cognitive issues for the student. They also made sure that they were very particular about how they're tracking student success, so it wasn't just tied into GPA and completion rate. For some students who are on a STEM path who have a requirement where they have to get a certain GPA within a certain number of attempts, if they weren't able to make that able to make that grade within that time frame, then what they would do is bring the student back in and discuss with them maybe some non-STEM options for the student so they're not just going through the system without making any progress. And so another thing that they decided to do was create something called the Communities of Interest. So this is very interesting. It's a brand new program that they've created. It really focuses on student engagement and student activities. And they've aligned that with the 8 meta majors that they have available at that college. Now, this is something that typically occurs on the departmental level where the faculty, advisors, and students are coming together to bring the student into, especially into the community, including the industry and just different people in the community itself, so that the students are really getting engaged and understanding how their degree is going to be used in the future so that they can go out and become employable. It really encourages their persistence. So if they see that there is a goal and that they do have opportunities available to them, it's going to encourage them to continue through their program of study. It is available at all campuses for the students, and they do have a lot of activities. So they have kickoff events, career development, workforce readiness, transfer workshops, and virtual communities. But they do encourage the students to go out and get involved in internships and just getting involved with the community in general. So that's really how the communities of interest focused on progress for those students.
And I'm here to talk about the ironically least complete piece, which is completion. Right? So, of course, students want to make progress toward a goal. And one of the issues that has been identified throughout the nation with community colleges is that community college students are transferring to four-year institutions with many, many excess credits. So what Miami-Dade has done is created really clear transfer agreements that partner with specific four-year institutions, which is why they want students to identify their transfer institutions so early. They did that in collaboration, face-to-face, as we mentioned, with the four-year faculty. And in fact, four-year faculty have a presence at Miami-Dade courses. We mentioned a couple of the high-profile programs with connection to industry. In fact, while we were there, the MAGIC program was announcing their partnership with a museum in Brazil. So they had dignitaries, and we were able to come to the awards ceremony. They also have those connections in the programs Laura mentioned earlier, the culinary program, and I am blanking on the other one. School of Fine Arts. We got to see all the famous people that have graduated from Miami-Dade. It was pretty cool. The communities of interest also create internships and networking opportunities. So the students are getting those connections early, so they still have those goals. All right. Our caveat here is that they haven't really, as Susan Mayer, who's the senior partner of Student Achieving Initiative, said, they haven't really moved the needle yet on completion because they see it as a 10-year process. They're about halfway through. And they looked at Georgia community colleges where they found that it was about a 10-year process to get that change. Laura mentioned earlier that the completion rates are targeted or tracked by program. So some of them are at 13%. They go all the way up to 39% right now. They're still there over 5 years. Right? She said, Susan Mayer also said, it takes a really long time because it's a really hard problem to solve. It takes cumulative experience and knowledge so that we can change the process.
Okay, so this is the overall takeaway that we had from Miami-Dade. Transparency and trust are key, which we are actually practicing right now. So that's awesome. They enabled faculty and staff to take ownership of transformation. So while everybody took kind of participation in the programs and making the change, it actually made people take ownership of what was happening, what the change that was happening at the institution. It prepared them for success with professional development. I think Laura talked about that earlier. This was the professional development that they gave faculty members that went in to have these conversations, to have the changes being made in the groups of 3 or 4. They gave professional development to these faculty members and staff members to have that difficult conversation, to sit down and problem solve. And then they included both instructional and student services staff on all teams. So faculty, student services, huge part of this. They were a combined team altogether. So that was a huge piece of Miami-Dade. They said transparency and make sure everybody's on the team.
So our presentation opened with really a long discussion of the entire transformation process by Susan Mayer, who is the administrator there who's really responsible for shepherding this process. And I took a lot away from that because I really heard her say this, and saw it throughout the rest of the discussions, where she really emphasized that in order to do this, they had to undergo really strong institutional reorganization and deep institutional reorganization. And that doesn't mean necessarily that they just sort of like scrapped everything and built a new process. In fact, what she emphasized is that a lot of what they had to do was not say, where do we find other resources, how do we do something new, but how do we reorganize the resources we have to align with these broader pathways that we're building. But in addition to that, what she really emphasized was that what they realized they needed to become was a dynamic, responsive institution, and an institution that could engage in this kind of institutional change, not as a big initiative like they were having to do, but as an institution that could respond and engage in institutional change as an iterative process. They commonly use the kind of dot-com metaphor of 2.0, 3.0, that they really organized themselves as an institution where they were comfortable with change, where they were able to shift resources as necessary, and that what they were doing was something that was in a constant state of revision. As they're going forward, they needed really good data, they needed to be able to look at it, and they needed to be able to make changes and adjustments, and not simply say, oh, we're going to go into this pathways model, and then it'll work in 3 years, but realize this was a 10-year process, and that you need to do this as an iterative, slow transformation over time with some big shifts throughout that.
And so, kind of piggybacking on what Grant said, one of the things that they felt was really important to express was that significant progress, it can be made without a lot of new investment. So it was really important to make sure that you're reallocating your resources. It doesn't mean that you have to go out and hire a whole lot of people for a brand new program. One of the things that they suggested was that you redesign the process, really look at your resources that you have. Can you reallocate those resources into that design? And then once you're done with that design, you can look and see after that reallocation, are there any gaps remaining? Are there any technological issues that they're having? And you can then, at that point, employ new people, new technologies, or whatever else is required.
And then, of course, most importantly is early execution, implementing all of our ideas and programs as soon as possible will help gather all that data and help us move forward and succeed. It will take that 7 to 10 years to see any retention rates stay. And so if we implement today, those 7 to 10 years will come a lot sooner than it would if we were to do this, implement 5 years from now, because we have the perfect program to implement. And then, 20 years from now, we're finally seeing it. So if we want to see that success, we need to start today. It's super important.
Excellent. That was wonderful. No, we're going to take questions at the end. Oh, okay. There you go. Thanks. Rather than taking questions after each presentation, we wanted to give every group the opportunity to present, and then we'll spend the last hour in Q&A with our group members. That was fantastic, Miami-Dade members. So Chicago, are y'all next? Okay, come on up.
Hello. Our group went to visit the City Colleges of Chicago. My name is Nikki Eversman. I'm a student with the Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Nareda Sellis, Program Manager with Early College High Schools. Eva Thompson, a counselor at Highland Campus.
Don Morris, Adjunct Faculty.
Adam Rethlake, Computer Services.
Teresa Ashley, Librarian at Northridge.
Yao Fan, Department Chair for Education Instruction.
Christian Raymond, the Radio, Television, Film Department.
Renaissance Algae, Sociology Faculty.
Matthew Pappas, Psychology Department.
Excellent. And we were, of course, joined by Dr. Cook and also the chairman of the board, Vic Villarreal, and a few other members of our planning committee, Christina, Courtney, Sue, and Mary. Awesome. They're all in the back corner. So the City Colleges of Chicago consist of 7 different campuses, which are all separately accredited, and they are destination campuses, so they have focus areas available at each location. Here's some pictures of our group. As far as our agenda, we started out at the district offices, and we met with different members of the redesign teams along with the executive vice provost, and they really explained more of the logistical side of the redesign. And after that, we visited 2 different campuses. We went to the Malcolm X College, which has a focus area of healthcare, and they are the ones who gave us a tour of their construction facility, which is the bottom picture. And then we also went to Harold Washington, which is more downtown Chicago, and they are the business and professional services focus destination. The City Colleges of Chicago started out their redesign process by redefining the college's vision. They wanted to become an economic engine to the city, and they came up with these 4 goals shown on the slide. If you can't read them, it's okay. The first one says, increase the number of students earning college credentials of economic value. Second, increase rate of transfer to bachelor's degree programs following City Colleges of Chicago graduation. Then, drastically improve outcomes for students requiring remediation. And the fourth one, increase the number and share of ABE, GED, ESL students who advance to and succeed in college-level courses. They started this process 5 years ago, and they've already seen major progress with their graduation rate increasing, the amount of degrees and certificates that they're awarding each year, and the percentage of adult education students that are entering into college-level coursework. So we're going to jump right into the 4 different phases of the student experience, and I'm going to hand it off to Nareda.
All right. So let me first point out that the Austin area map or the Travis County map is not to scale when it's side by side with the Chicago map. So they have 7 campuses. We have 11. They have an awesome transportation system. We do not. So they are able to travel and go to a host site for healthcare or a particular program because they have that great transportation system. That does cause some limitations for the students that have to, go across town per se for a specific program. But like I mentioned, great transportation system. We traveled on train, and I think it took us 15 minutes to get from one end of town to another. So it was not bad at all. You can also see our area is, we have all these different service area school districts that we serve. And that's one of the things we ask them is, how many school districts do you work with? They work with one school district. Yes. Now, that one school district has 60 high schools. We serve about the same number of high schools, but with 25 school districts. But what was really neat about that is they have one articulation agreement, one MOU. So that was very nice. Very nice. Something else that was very interesting is, as there are separate campuses, yet they are unified with one vision, one goal, and a set of programs, they have their own identity. So students within that community have their own mascot, their own little niche that they belong to and they contribute to building. So on-ramps, they have 2 on-ramps. One is the Adult Education and Gateway Bridge. So this is where your post-high school grads or your dev ed students, adult ed, they come in through that pathway. And they have multiple programs that meet that need. Some of them waive tuition. Some of them have other reduced cost options, but they build that through community partnerships. They're dual enrollment, dual credit. They have students come in that way through their one school district, through partnerships they already have with STEM programs, dual enrollment. And that population direct from high school to college was about 30%, so not a large group. Actually, when they broke down to us what the enrollment was in DevEd versus, high school to college, college ready, 90% of their students placed at DevEd in at least one area. 90% of the over 100,000 students enrolled. One thing that's also very interesting is with this on-ramp vision, they show students up front as part of their recruitment process how they can work their way up through stackable credentials. So you're not just coming in with one defined goal or ill-defined goal, but you can see how you can move through the associates up to the bachelor's for transfer. There's also points in and out of this process for you to go into the workforce. So it's very clearly laid out, and later Eva will go into the degree plans. So we superimpose two things here, but if you see the program finder and then the career finder, when you go to the main page for city colleges, their website is ccc.edu, really simple. When you go to their website, the main page, you start finding your program or finding your career. So from the beginning, you are attacking that big monster. What do I want to do? Because that guides what courses you're going to take. So you have to figure that out, and it all loops you to the pathway. So these are conversations that we normally have at advising once you've become a student, and it may take you a long time before you actually have those conversations because you have to know what to ask. So here you do it up front. It's part of the recruitment process. They also identified 10 meta majors. So they have 200 degree plans, but they fall into 10 meta majors, and you have to declare one upon entry. Even if you're still unsure, you have to start in one of those, and you begin your coursework. Your initial courses are transferable within that meta major, so they do count toward other more specific degree plans. So another piece that they're working on right now is a phone app. So high school students, and really anyone, not just high school students, they're just piloting it first with the high school students, is that at the touch of your fingertips on your phone, we survive off of that thing. There's so many things we accomplish there. Map out your future on your phone. You do your banking there, you do everything else there, calendars. So map out your future. Start looking at transfer guides with other institutions, start looking at workforce programs, start looking at careers, and you can start doing all of that before you even start. I think that was one of the big takeaways, and we'll talk about that towards the end, is that you can begin researching and formulating questions, and that's one of the main things that, as you all know, our students struggle with. They don't even know what to ask. But if you start giving them information up front, they'll come to you to an advising session with more questions, more specific questions. All right, and I'll pass it on to Eva. She'll go in depth into the advising components.
Great, thank you. So from the point of enrollment, once a student applies, like Nareda was saying, they're declaring one of the 10 focus areas. And based on that initial application, then they're assigned an advisor. And that links directly to orientation. So their orientation is a requirement. It's 1 to 2 days. I'm just going to repeat that. 1 to 2 days, not hours, not online segments, but in-person, on-campus orientations. And that's based on the focus area that they've selected. So their orientation is geared towards that. And within that process, they're given the opportunity to make more informed degree planning and career selection. And like Miami-Dade and like us, City Colleges of Chicago also uses Focus 2 as one of their career assessment and career guidance tools. So that's something they're given access to. Many of the things that are done in orientation are actually things that ACC rolls into kind of their extended enrollment process. So if a student has applied and then they select their orientation date, at orientation, if they haven't turned in their residency, their transcript, or they haven't taken their placement test, that's happening that day. They're also meeting with the advisor for their focus area, planning their first semester, and starting to do that schedule building, which is similar to Miami-Dade. It's predictive schedule building. So students are inputting their preference for days and times, and then that's driving the course offerings. The other piece about scheduling is that they are working with block scheduling for a lot of their programs, not all of them. But that's also helping them with retention because they're allowing students to build in childcare, work, even transportation issues if they need to get from one campus to another. So that's all built around student preferences, and there's basically questionnaires that the student fills out before registration, which indicates where they want to be and when they want to be there. So one of the things that was really impressive from the get-go was the clear messaging about the programs. So despite having 7 different colleges, all of the colleges use this same format that you're seeing up here for their certificates and their degrees. So it's a brief little statement about what the program is, and then if there are any admission requirements clearly outlined, like I love this on all the health science ones, I don't know if you can see it on this one, but it's like must have no felony requirements, right? So it's some of the stuff that students have to dig deeply into our website to get to. So they're kind of front-loading it, and I really appreciated the transparency that's provided to students in this process. And it also has got a checklist if there's any developmental education courses that are required or ESL courses. So from the beginning, they're starting off knowing these are the courses that you need, and then mapping out semester by semester. So as mentioned, an advisor is assigned upon application, and they begin working with them in orientation. And I'll talk a little bit more in a bit about the case management model, but these are 3 centers that each college has: career planning and placement, transfer, and wellness. So career planning and placement, they work with students from start to finish. Confused about major, unsure about your career goal, you work with career planning and placement. Wanting to go to employer events or learn more about the occupations, panel discussions with employers, career planning and placement. Looking for an internship, part-time job in your field, same story. So it's from the beginning, they're building that career connection, and it carries all the way through what they say the life cycle of the student. The Transfer Center does really exactly what you think it would do, is working with students in planning their courses towards transfer and working with those articulation agreements. And the Wellness Center is unique because that is psychosocial services. So it's distinct from the academic services, although they do address like test anxiety and stress management, time management. They also will look at depression or crisis counseling, homelessness. So there's an array of services that are provided there. And that's staffed by counselors and psychologists, and again, at each campus. And students can access those services for free, but those services also are available for employees. And I think it's 3 to 5 visits are free, and then after that, there's an insurance option and different resources to pay for ongoing services. The Wellness Center also is a training site. So this is another one of those partnerships that we saw with city colleges where they're training approximately 50 master's and doctoral students in the city of Chicago in their practicum placement. So they're getting a lot of service, but they're also benefiting a lot from those professionals in that field. And with the entry, so we think of entry as, application kind of through their first round of college credit courses. So developmental ed is included in this segment. And their development ed, they address a lot of it through adult ed programs, like we were talking about the foundation skills and the launch program. And then those students that are testing into the highest level of dev ed, they are almost always put into paired or co-enrolled classes or accelerated classes, so they can very quickly get up to speed because like Miami-Dade and many of the schools that we've been looking at, the goal is to get them into college credit English, college credit math in their first semester. And then case management and the degree mapping is technologically supported by more integrated software than I think we're experiencing here at ACC right now. They use a grades first system, which is an early alert system that's allowing faculty, staff throughout the college to flag people. Say the student has not been attending class, the first assignment's not been turned in, the first test hasn't been passed, and that allows then an advisor to reach out to that student. So that early alert system is in place, and then Smart Planner, they're kind of beefing this up right now, probably as we speak. They're launching Smart Planner. But it's similar to what you might be seeing students use right now at ACC, the self-service, where they're using more of a shopping cart approach. But they're preloading it with semester plans. They're flagging courses that the student does not meet the prereqs for. And if a student attempts to register for a class that's not on their plan, they need to see an advisor. So they can't do that on their own. So they can't really veer off track. It's not that they can't do any of those classes, but they need to have a discussion with someone in order to make that selection. So I think that's all of my pieces. Yes. Oh, student to advisor ratio. So they started their reinvention, kind of reinvention 1. I think they're on reinvention 7 now, 7 or 8. So they went from around 900 students to 1 advisor. To this past year, they were quoting us when we visited 350 to 400 advisors, or students per advisor. Huge, huge. So what we could really see was that their advising was more in-depth and more intentional and taking more time, and they're case managing students, and it's having an impact. So that's the good news. I have one more thing, right? Right, so once we get them entered, we assume that they will make progress. And so progress is, they're entered into a course of study, and that takes them through the 75% of their requirements are completed. And Don's going to talk more in detail about progress.
Thanks, Eva. Good afternoon. One of the things you see emerging here is that it's a process, not an event, right? It's kind of one of the things we teach our students about taking exams. You don't wait the night before to study, right? So kind of along this side, that's what it reminded me of. That was my mental anchor. Progress, one of the things that emerged that we've seen, the two things that the city colleges are looking at is data-driven decisions and market forces. Those are two things that really stood out in my mind. And the reinvention program really coalesces around the idea that they're building students to prepare them for the job market, okay? And you do the studies and you look at the students that write, why are they in college? They all want jobs. So it might make sense. But that entails a strong relationship, a partnership with industry, right? And the idea being, and this is a quote, to link educational programs with economics, business, and job opportunities. So how did they do that? Well, they used the data. One of the tools they used is EMSI, which is a private company similar to Texas Workforce Commission that gives you data on where are the jobs, where are the opportunities, where are the high earning potentials. Okay, EMSI. And so they show you where the different jobs are at and identify the employers that they should partner with. One of the unique findings they found is that when they looked at the jobs, they saw high earnings, they saw high growth, but they had few graduates. So that's an area that they had to address. The relationship with the employers and the industry entailed 4 major aspects. One, the employers were involved in the program design. They actually came out to the campuses. They had direct interaction with the students. They also worked in building curriculum reviews and on-campus exposure and workforce learning. The 4th item was employers were committed to interviewing students for job opportunities. I thought that was really a good partnership they had going there. And they asked themselves 2 questions when they were developing these processes. Are program enrollments in high-demand areas keeping pace? And number 2, what are the completion rates in those areas? Okay, the 3rd area is stackable credentials. That's an important aspect. And I know we do this to a certain extent. 3 main areas are the I lost my notes here. Vertical, horizontal, and the value added. Okay, the vertical is the traditional what we're using. The horizontal would be building on multiple types of certificates as you go along. And the third is coming in with, if you already have a degree, come in and get a certificate. And then that builds on the skills that you have. I see this in my area with hospitality management. We get tons of students that already have degrees. They come in and they need a certificate because they're working in the field. But they actually go out and promote this to bring in additional students. Two more areas that are important with stackable credentials are that it provides multiple entry and exit points. So students can come in, find a way to get in, and then build on those and then exit. And if they decide to come back in, they know right where they're at. And the second one was, you see they've got the, what was on the earlier slide, they have the B certificate and the A certificate. So the B certificate is about 16 hours. You hit that level and you're like, hey, I got a certificate. You go home, your friends around you say, hey, good job. You get that confidence built up, and then you move on to the second. Rather than just say, oh, I've been in college for 2 years, I'm finally going to get my associate's degree, or 3 or 4, and you get discouraged. So these stackable credentials really boosts confidence. Next, we're going to talk with Adam, and he's going to talk about completion rates.
Completion. Always one of the hardest. It overlaps with just about everything. So since renovation began in 2010, the numbers you can see are telling a positive growth, telling a great tale of success. Graduation rate is up 71%. Degrees awarded are up 80%. Total awards are up 21%, and credit enrollment is up 15%. Granted, those are from all the colleges combined. Each college itself has different and separate numbers. Some can be higher, some can be lower. So the local companies, around 150, rallied the community and the college in helping the college create pathways that contain the needed skill set, for the student to succeed in the given fields. Okay, CCC created a sliding scale for tuition. The scale is based on 2 simple ideas. Number 1, all-inclusive, no hidden fees. Number 2, the more classes you take, the less it costs. Per class, yes. From the single class to taking 5 to 11 classes, you're looking at over 50% difference. There's also a boot camp, for students that come in that are unable to pass the tests for placement in the beginning. That test is for free for you to begin, even before they get enrolled into school. An amazing bit of useful data. A new business intelligence system has launched in 2013, enabling broad staff, faculty to access student data, thus enabling more evidence-based decision-making. The data illustrates the number of students that are ready to graduate to those that seem at risk or are falling through the cracks. Now let us take a look at some of the takeaways.
All right, so from our visit and research of the City Colleges of Chicago, a number of takeaways that we really think are valuable. And the first one is really the depth and the scope of the redesign that was undertaken, and the incredible integration across every campus, every program, every course, student involvement, faculty involvement, student support involvement, that really was necessary to make this happen. And that all started with, of course, the program relevancy issue and looking at what programs they were looking to grow, what programs they were looking to invest in, and then beyond that, building these stackable credentials that would be meaningful. And tying that all together from a messaging standpoint was hypercritical. And we saw that really in some rich ways from a standpoint of how messaging was shared from a standpoint of different faculty and staff and administrators that we walked into and talked to, but also just from a web design standpoint and how students interact with the program. And the examples of the website as far as the design of it, the look of it, how students are able to navigate through the program in very simple, straightforward ways that are not, they're not running into these obstacles that some schools run into. So that was our first big takeaway. The second one was really a focus on pathway guidance across the board, and really from the connection point to the completion point and beyond was really strong. And so what we're talking about there is the advisor component, and like was mentioned, of course, they in their goals, they made a commitment to hire many more advisors and to recruit faculty advisors so that there was a handoff from advisors to faculty advisors, so to really help within the department. And so this was built into the infrastructure. This didn't just happen by accident. And so that support, critical for students, and also the industry component was key. Commitment to hire students, to interview students, not hire. That'd be nice. Commitment to hire students. Let's have that. I vote for that. Commitment to interview students, big component. And then, of course, literally having students up front being able to see their pathways, whether it's career, which some of the programs actually listed incomes that students can learn with specific kinds of jobs on right up front, as well as the specific transfer guides, the classes that they need to take going on to the four-year school. So huge piece. The third thing was how they did it from a reinvention standpoint of the teams that were involved. So a couple, 4 or 5 people on each team redeveloped this over 200 pathways, which obviously is a lot. But how they did it from a standpoint of having advisors, faculty, staff, part of the planning team involved to make this happen was a serious investment at the time. But they did this on a full-time basis. This wasn't something that they're doing a couple hours a week, and so serious investment in this process. So the fourth thing we take away was the commitment to, as I put in parentheses here, 21st century technological infrastructure. So they upgraded their technological structures in some really deep, rich ways. So even some simple things like using Smart Planner, which makes it so that students can't even enroll in a class that's not in their meta major, and enforces prerequisites. I know that is a foreign concept in some places, but just saying. So from that angle, that was a huge piece, but also from an intervention standpoint of helping students when students take off ramps or get off track, helping them get back in through alert systems that get them back so somebody can contact them. If a student doesn't show up to class for a semester or doesn't enroll, reaching out to them and getting them back involved. So then the fifth thing was also the financing piece, which we didn't really touch on in the presentation. But 2 things here. One was literally using the zero-based budgeting. So every year, they would recreate the budget based on needs for each program, which raised $60 million for the redesign effort. So that's a big question. Well, how do you pay for this? So that was part of it. The other piece was a commitment to consistent fundraising. So just from their fundraising efforts, they indicated that they raised $40 million a year from fundraising. And even at the Malcolm X healthcare facility, they had a capital campaign that raised $250 million for that space. So community colleges can do that. Community colleges do that. They did it. So those were big takeaways from that standpoint. And then the sixth thing, which we did talk about, was the plan and see how things go a viewpoint. That you have to plan and put it in progress, get it rolling, and things are going to come up. It's not going to be perfect, but you have to put together the best plan that you can. And take away with that, which really ties back to the first one, is how do you start doing that? The big point is being really clear about your reinvention goals. And that ties, of course, to student success. And what are we trying to do with the program and the college and the community? So have those set and reverse engineer it from there as far as designing the program. So that was the big takeaway there. So that's our presentation. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to questions.
Okay, one more to go. Sinclair.
All right, guys. Who's still with us here?
We're almost
Hand
done.
up.
We
Yeah.
can do this.
All right.
Here we go. Go, St. Clair. Go, go.
Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah, in light of our schedule, we are going to give you a very brief but a very action-packed overview of our visit to beautiful Sinclair College in Dayton, Ohio. So, quick introductions. My name's Catherine Moss. I work with the Supplemental Instruction and Bridge program. And then, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? I feel like that could be better.
My name is My name is Estrella Barrera, and I'm the department chair for the Occupational Therapy Assistant Program.
Hello, my name is Ruth Reinhardt. I'm a counselor at South Austin campus.
Good afternoon. My name is Rafael Ochoa. I'm an advising specialist at Highland.
And hello, I'm Nancy Laudenslager, Workforce Development and Continuing Education.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Malo, and I'm a coordinator of student life at the Highland campus.
Good afternoon. I'm Deanna Johnson, a professor of developmental writing at the Riverside campus.
All right.
I feel like we're like a little high school size when I tell you about the demographics of Sinclair. Only 28,000 students compared to what we've heard from Miami-Dade and Chicago. But the overview for Sinclair is there are about 28,000 students overall that they serve, and they have one main campus and 6 centers in the Dayton area. And they provide over 170 programs and certificates. And the demographic breakdown of the students that they serve, it's about 66% white, 14% black or African American, 13% race or ethnicity is unknown, and 2% Hispanic Latino, which is quite different from our demographics. And the age distribution is 18 to 24-year-old, about 47%, and 47% between 25 to 64-year-olds. Okay. All right, Ruth is going to share with you the rationale for the pathways at Sinclair.
Good afternoon. So historically, community colleges have been the backbone of higher education. And community college currently, the students we serve, that is a gateway. We are a gateway access to students. So our mission is a little bit different. And because community colleges are able to give students the skills and certificates and degrees that are needed for the new jobs in the 21st century, it's important that the redesign journey continue. So with that in mind, Sinclair realized that they needed to redesign their structure, their facilities, and their programs in order to create more transformative relationships with their students so they could go on the journey of actually completing their degrees. Because Sinclair gets their funding based on their performance, it's very vital for them to increase the number of degrees and certificates that they award so they can continue to provide the innovative and quality education to their students. Secondly, with the social inequality becoming larger and larger in the U.S., Sinclair felt that they could really move the needle to strengthening the middle class by doing this redesigned program. With that in mind, the leadership of Sinclair felt very committed to the redesign program, and they worked very collaboratively in conjunction with staff and faculty with the redesign program to facilitate student completion. Prior to the redesign, what they did was they had a cafeteria plan, much like we do. Students would come in, too many choices, they were undefined on their degree plans, they would end up taking classes they didn't need, which all was causing them not to complete. So Rafael's going to talk about how they redesigned their programs to facilitate completion.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. Everybody's here, man. Full crowd. Okay, so as we've seen earlier, Miami-Dade College had eight communities or meta majors. City of Chicago had 10. Sinclair broke it down into 5 areas, 5 career communities, what they call. They have about 170 programs that generate about 220 credentials, whereas ACC, we have about 295 credentials that we offer, both associate, certificates, and the marketable skill programs. So they took those 170 programs and created pathways for each one of them. The key here being that they did it with faculty and advisors together. Big key, and as you've heard it in the other 2 presentations, faculty and advisor working together is the way to do this or to approach it. So out of those 5 career 5 career communities, they insist on students determining which community they want to go into when they first come in. So the undeclared major that comes in through the door, the front desk staff is responsible to kind of figure out which community they want to go into. If they're undeclared, then general studies or something similar to what we have here as general studies would be the way to start. The reason being is that Sinclair, they see students by appointment only. During peak registration, they open up blocks of hours where they can see walk-in students, but otherwise it's appointment only, and they get to see a lot of students. And this is at the main campus. The other 6 locations, they have generalist advisors, whereas the main campus, you have group of advisors that specialize in one field, like health sciences, business. We know that in business, you can break it down into business administration, management, accounting, and some of the other certificates. So you have advisors that specialize in those specific areas and can guide the student through a lot of the steps. The reason why they like, and the reason why we also like career communities or meta majors, is that it gives the student an opportunity to meet students with goals, academic goals, career goals. Plus, you're going to have faculty that is in tune to what they need to study. In addition to that, they're also going to have opportunities to meet with members of the community, members from different companies that come in and help out with the staff as far as showing them the projections on the careers, where they're going in the area and nationwide as well. So they offer a lot of exploratory options there. Some of the concerns were, well, are they stuck doing these specific majors, these specific classes? And the answer is no. They always have the freedom to go through the forest if they don't want to take the highway to the end goal. So that's not taken away from them. We've heard faculty is concerned about that. You're taking away options from students. No, we're not. The option is still there. This is for students that know what they want to do and they want to get there. And stackable degrees is also another issue that kind of looked at it. Being able to use financial aid, let's say, to stay in a program like business, and while at the same time satisfying the requirements for a certificate in accounting, a specialist accounting or one of the other ones. Couple of things that I want to mention real quick is that during their inaugural year, 2014-2015, 5,500 students participated in career community events, which included everything from social, personal, career, academic, and financial domains. That also drove up the number of students visiting student services. Back in 2010, it was 58%, and that went up to 87% by 2015. That is a huge number of students, and remember, by appointment only, which is key. It can be done. It's just a bit of juggling, and everybody needs to buy in and do it kind of the same way. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nancy so she can discuss how they put together pathways. Thank you.
Thank you. So in getting started with this huge endeavor, one of the first things that the leadership of Sinclair decided was that they needed to get together the key institutional stakeholders. Everyone needed to know what the status was of the college, what was the goals, where did they need to be, what did they have to do, and what strategies could be put in place. So congratulations to all of you. You are the ACC stakeholders, so we can expect great things now that you know. There was a strong emphasis, as was mentioned several times, about getting the faculty, staff, and the processes coordinated and get them involved. That was very, very difficult. So they were fortunate at Sinclair that they had 2 champions. And these champions, and they couldn't stop talking about them. In fact, they presented to us. There was a faculty member and an advisor. So they were this incredible duo team. And what they did was they had the energy, the enthusiasm, the persistence to start to bring other people at the college together. They looked in every nook and cranny of the college. And they found individuals who were going to be early adopters, people who said, yes, I'm willing to embrace the change that's needed. I'm willing to be bold and courageous, and I'll go with you. So these teams started creating the pathways, and they started with 2, because that was a huge step just to begin with. And then as other faculty and staff at the college saw that, wow, these 2 pathways, there might be something here. Or maybe it was just because of peer pressure. But whatever, they started to phase in their additional pathways. Just one of the examples, and there are many things that need to be redesigned, but just as an example, one of them was to decide more appropriate electives for the pathways. So in the past, student could take whatever elective they chose to take. And they decided that if they had more relevant and appropriate electives, that might keep the student more engaged. And it was also help with the scheduling. So as an example, theater majors. One of the collaborative or more relevant electives could be Shakespearean literature. So that would be one that they would encourage the students to take. So before anything would be implemented, it was really important that the faculty and the staff agreed upon what they agreed to do. So that they would agree on what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. So that was really important. So they made sure that that was in place. And another thing that they really emphasized was the importance of having a librarian on the team. And they mentioned this over and over, and they said, whatever you do, make sure you have a librarian on the team, because that person has incredible resources, things that you can't even imagine. It'll certainly help move your program forward. So when you see our librarian, and I know Teresa's here today, she needs a high five. Okay. And Vanessa's going to share with us about the implementation.
Good afternoon. So now the question is, well, how was all of this implemented? And the first step was to move from decentralization to a centralization advising model. And Rafael did a great job of describing what that model looks like. One of the things I like to add to that, in addition to the appointment system, is that they do, and we heard this from some of the other presentations, per advisor is about 318 students. In addition to that, each career community has one lead advisor that is guiding them through the way. I like to emphasize the career community piece and the fact that these advisors all specialize in a specific area. In some cases, yes, you have multiple programs. For instance, if it was the health and science area, then you would have radiology, occupational therapy, et cetera. But rather than having to know 300 plus different types of pathways, you have the ability to be focused on that one particular area, and of course, creating more efficiency and effectiveness with our students. In addition to that, we look at the data portion. The fact is that we arrived here due to evidence, and what Sinclair Community College and what many of us are doing is taking a look at that data, looking at the evidence, finding the solutions, and then taking action and beginning the implementation process to ensure the success of our students. And so that's exactly what they did in many aspects, in all aspects actually. So they looked at things like course schedules, for instance. If you have a specific amount of students that are enrolling into a particular career community in that area, then you know now the ratio that you are dealing with, and so you're going to provide adequate course sections. In comparison to perhaps having course sections and having 1 or 2 students sign up for that section, then you have to eliminate that section. So it eliminates that process and it allows that fluidity of our coursework for our students. In addition, they are also looking at the ratio of the students to advisors. So if one career community has X amount of students, then they're going to make sure that they have that proper amount of advisors hired for that particular career community. So everything is data-driven and follow through with transparency. They're very, very clear about their successes and the things that they need to grow in. And the whole entire institution is involved in a collaborative effort of understanding that. We are going to have, Catherine's going to talk a little bit more about that transparency, what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and transition us to the takeaways. Thank you. Deanna.
Now we venture into the major takeaways that we found from Sinclair college-wide. One of the main noticeable features of Sinclair is that they are a single centralized campus model, while ACC, we have multiple campuses, and all of them are powerhouses in and of themselves. Whereas with Sinclair, they have several small campuses, but they have one main campus. This is important because it gives faculty, staff, administrators, and students a chance to collaborate with one another. While we were there and took our tours, there were many times when people would walk down the hall and they knew each other's name, whereas ACC, we may only see each other during our General Assembly and professional development days. Also, it was important to have that centralized model because they were able to collaborate and take part in different ventures that the college was having on particular days. In fact, while we were there, they had broken up into teams because they were trying to pass one of the bond issues. So they were trying to involve their students, faculty, staff, and all the key stakeholders to make sure that those particular impending votes and policies were passed, which we found very encouraging, which leads to the next particular takeaway, developing a position to coordinate the Pathways implementation. With Guided Pathways, there are many moving parts, and it is essential to have one particular center lead, and that particular person for Sinclair was Kathleen Cleary. She's the associate provost of student completion, and basically Kathleen's job was to make sure that everybody was on one accord, making sure that everybody knew the information and it was disseminated college-wide, and making sure that there was transparency with both internal and external stakeholders at the institution, which is very important because we want to make sure, especially at ACC, that everyone knows the goal and rationale for Guided Pathways, which is the next bullet point, which is to make sure we're developing and establishing effective and efficient professional development for our faculty and staff. While some of us may be immersed in Guided Pathways and we may already have the information, there are still some people who may not understand or know our target goals. So it's important that we collaborate as a unit to make sure that all of us are collaborating together to make the best Guided Pathways design model possible for our students. One of the key takeaways at Sinclair, when they created their particular units to design their pathways, was to make sure they had both veterans and, as they say, to make sure to have the people who know where the bones are buried so that you can connect the past with the present, and also new people, because sometimes when you're so involved, it takes a new perspective to come in and give you ideas in order for us to make sure that we have the best possible model that is going to serve our community and all our extending areas. Which brings to the next takeaway, which is to make sure that the rationale and goals are communicated within our particular college unit. A lot of times, you may be sitting somewhere, you may have a great ideal, and you may say, I wish we had this particular resource in order to better help our students. And then you may realize when someone else tells you that we already have that. And it's true. ACC has a lot of innovative software, a lot of innovative programs and resources, but sometimes we're so inundated in our own individual areas that we don't know. So it's important to make sure that all of that information is distributed college-wide so that, again, we're making sure our students get from registration to graduation in the most streamlined possible way. And now we're going to move into the 4 major categories of the takeaways: connect, entry, progress, and completion.
In 2001, the Sinclair Service District area had a high school dropout rate of almost 26%. And so what they decided with community leaders, with the 16 school districts, that they would build a Fast Forward Center. And this Fast Forward Center was designed to capture all those high school dropouts, re-engage with them, and find a non-traditional high school, an alternative high school, where they could go and find a good fit for them, because not all high schools are a good fit, and that's why some of the reasons why they didn't finish in their high school in their own home area. So they did what they called a perfect fit, and they re-engaged these students so they could get their high school diploma, and then the next step was for Sinclair to come in and say, okay, let's come to the college. That's your next move. So 8 years later, the high school dropout rate in Dayton, Ohio, went to 12%. So it was cut in half. And they still follow that process today, and I think that's really innovative. It's working well. One of the other ways that they increased their rate of completion was by, it's equivalent to our early college, high school, and to dual credit. They call it College Credit Plus. So they put some more efforts into that to make it more successful. And one of the other things they did was to redesign the placement strategies because they were trying to reduce unnecessary developmental courses and students unnecessarily being placed into courses where they could get lost forever and then get discouraged and not finish the college. So as an example of that, in the STEM program, for the math placement test, they had a different test for individuals who were planning on going into a liberal arts program versus a STEM program. They did the same thing in the reading area and the writing. So it was just a different focus, and it was a way to get the students started into their career program of choice and to keep them engaged and to make it more relevant to the type of reading, writing, and math that they could relate to and could be successful. Raphael's going to talk about entry.
I'm back. So, 2 takeaways for entry. The first one, if we haven't driven it home yet, is that participation between faculty and advisors, key in making this happen. And hopefully to also rotate them as we move forward in this. You can't have the same people in these groups forever and ever and ever and a half. So big takeaway. They gave us an example that they had resistance from some departments that were not willing to put together a map for their students. However, at some point, they were shamed into putting them out because they had students coming in saying, hey, my friend Johnny has a map for his major. Well, where's my map? They didn't have one, so they were forced to put one together for them. You can only isolate yourself so much. So to that end, to bring down those silos, not just for faculty and advisors, and in our case, counselors, but also for every other stakeholder in the college, whether it's a dean, an advising supervisor, every single person needs to participate in this. There's no ifs, ands, or buts on that area. The other one, optional orientation. I'm of the school of thought that it shouldn't be optional, it should be mandatory. We've already heard that Miami-Dade College had a 3-hour orientation. City of Chicago, 2 to 3 days, 1 to 2 days, excellent. So our orientation, when we first went out, it was supposed to run 2 hours, 2.5 if you really extended it. We whittled it down to 1 hour, and even that was not doing it correctly. So that's something that even though it's optional for them, I think it should be something mandatory for us. And they made a point of saying that if a student comes in and doesn't know which career community they want to go into, then the front desk will automatically put them into one of the orientations that they had. And they had one almost every day. During peak, they would open up 2 of them. So it made it easy for them to transfer into it. Even though it wasn't mandatory, they made an emphasis that it is important for you to learn what's going on. We have students in our sessions now that are coming in, and we have to spend time showing them how to register for classes, how to read a schedule. And even though it's on printed material, it doesn't get driven home unless we're actually in a classroom with them. And they don't see it as an orientation. They see us as teachers teaching them their first lesson, which is what we were saying earlier in Miami-Dade College, where advisors teach and faculty advises. I'm going to transfer over to Catherine. There you go. Thank you.
All right, so Deanna and I, we represent Progress. Just kidding, kind of. And so I think one of the common threads in all of our visits is that the colleges that have been successful in implementing guided pathways have used data, and it was the same at Sinclair. Their data analytics was amazing, both in-house and the people that they'd hired to help them do that. But one thing that really stuck with me was, a lot of times with data we can focus on differences and deficits. But in Sinclair, they really made a point to focus on data as a rallying point. In the conference room where we were holding our meeting, they had a poster that had all of the graduates' names from that particular year. And that just helped remind everybody, oh, I helped that person in advising, or I had that person in a class. So it just creates this common rallying point for everybody within the college. And I think that that's something that we'll really need as we're moving through the implementation of these pathways.
One of the targeted goals of ACC in relation to guided pathways is to make sure that developmental education is both accelerated, contextualized, and innovative. And we found that to be true at Sinclair. Their students rather, are able to complete their developmental education because they have integrated reading and writing courses. And they're in 8-week time sessions so that students are able to take both the first level and the exit level the same semester and then move on to their credit courses, which leads to the contextualized part. Students are now able to see the need and the reason for actually having to take developmental education because they're moving right along into their Comp 1 classes, into their history classes, and fulfilling their degree maps. And in terms of innovative, Sinclair, for their integrated reading and writing courses, they have their own warehouse per se, where they have all their information, all of their materials, so it's easy and very accessible for both their full-time and part-time instructors. They also have their own individual writing labs and tutoring labs so that students don't have to be overwhelmed by going into the huge learning lab. They can go and get individualized help with their reading and writing, which is all the goal of ACC as well, to help our developmental students.
Well, Estrella and I are completion. We're almost done.
Yes, we're almost done.
Okay. So at St. Clair, I think their philosophy was really about, it was really important for them because they're a very small community. It was all about the social equality, and it was the right thing to do for their community. So by engaging and aligning their curriculums with the economic development in their communities and creating jobs that would give their students jobs when they graduated, that was very important to them because they wanted their students to graduate earning a wage where they can support their families, and or they could graduate to a 4-year school. And that was really important to me. I thought, God, that's really what it's about. We want them to graduate with something that's going to help them be successful and move to the middle class. And then the second thing is they had seamless transfers. They had over 92 articulation agreements with 23 transfer universities. So students would transfer perfectly. They would not have any, they had very little excess credits, which was very good for the students because they could earn their certificates and degrees in a very quick manner and then transfer to a 4-year university.
Getting close. We're getting close. And two areas of completion that they also reviewed was their enhanced curriculums. And it was really exciting to see how they did this. They partnered with industry, and they looked at where were the emerging industries, and those are the degree plans that we need to develop. So they worked with industry to develop those degree plans and enhance their programs so that they, again, were guiding the student into the workplace and meeting the demands of the workforce. So we were super impressed with the way they did that, and the collaboration and the efforts they put behind that were really impressive. In fact, over the past 2 years, they developed 5 new degree plans and 27 certificates that directly linked back to the workforce needs of their community. And they were really proud of them. They really bragged about that and, again, had that transparency for the stakeholders to recognize as well. And then lastly was the credential attainment. We all want to see our students graduate, and they, again, championed the students, and they displayed those accomplishments and shared them with a lot of enthusiasm with us, and shared that in 2012 they'd set a goal that they wanted to award 5,000 credentials by 2018. And that would have been a 50% increase in what they were currently doing. And they shared that in this academic year of 2014-15, they had already awarded 4,050 credentials. So they were on track to get to their goal and probably exceed that goal. And again, they displayed that very openly on their campus so that the students could see that and other stakeholders in the college could see that. And they really were so supportive of and proud of the work they were doing. And, another just total takeaway for all of us is we were so impressed with the way they partnered with faculty and the advisors and the community and worked through the good, the bad, and the ugly through these processes. And they're beginning to see some change. Is this long-standing change? I don't know. But there was a lot of enthusiasm about, our work is actually beginning to pay off. And we left there thinking, wow, if they can do that, surely we can do that as well. So, you want to come on up and close this up?
All right, so let's take it home, right? We highlighted some of the things that definitely worked for Sinclair, but one of the things that they also emphasized is it was not going to be all sunshine and smiles as we go through this process. And I think that's one thing that we have to keep in mind. So we have to stay the course. It's not going to work out the first time. What is it? Somebody's on 7.0 of this thing. But keep our overall goal in mind of that this is going to be a great change for our students. I lost my notes. Okay, our final, more tangible takeaway that we wanted to share with you guys were these awesome sweatshirts that they gave us. So, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it.
Don't go far.
Okay.
Because the questions are going to be directed toward the team members. So Chicago and Miami-Dade, come back up here, and we'll see who has the answers to the questions that might be posed. And maybe they have some specific questions related to your particular presentations.
First, I want to say I enjoyed all the presentation. You guys did a real good job in kind of covering the water, the landscape and all the places that you went to. But they mentioned in the Miami-Dade that there was soft skill training that was mandatory.
So they started without it and found that their team leaders were meeting with some resistance, as you might expect, and so it was kind of a thing that they figured out after the fact, and had to take a step back and provide that, but found that after they had provided that training, and I had the same understanding that it was really about communication,
conflict resolution.
Yes, exactly. And consensus building, that their team leaders were much more successful then in guiding the teams within the various pathways to accomplish their goal and to actually get to the end point of having those course sequence guides.
We did the same thing in Sinclair Community College. The same process was talked about, that they needed those that were guiding the team to have those soft skills, and hence some professional development and training was provided. For that, effective communication was really the key thing, and conflict resolution, because you were going to be talking some hot topics, and how do you get a consensus to move forward. So that was addressed at Sinclair also.
Yes.
And I heard that at one of the community colleges they had zero-based budgeting. It seems to me that in addition to creating things, which is what this is, you have to get rid of things. And I would hope that what would complement this would be some type of zero-based internal regulatory reform. So where you have processes, where you have paper requirements, where you have procedures that long, long ago outlived their usefulness, that they would be re-examined and, if necessary, eliminated. I mean, as a faculty member, I could think of perhaps a half a dozen things that I'm required to do that, frankly, I question the usefulness of it. It just doesn't make any sense. And perhaps sometimes, a long, long time ago, it did make sense. So I would hope that an examination of internal processes and procedures, okay, with the idea of adopting a zero-based attitude. If it's not working, and if it just seems to clutter up things, get rid of it. And you can save money in the process.
And that's the kind of feedback I think we're going to have to get back widely across the college.
In science, a theory, to be a good theory, has to be falsifiable. So my question would be, how will you know if guided pathways... In science, a theory, to be a good theory, has to be falsifiable. A theory that's not falsifiable is an ideology. And so my question for the presenting teams would be, how will you know if guided pathways doesn't work?
There's plenty of data. I mean, there are many, many studies that have looked at guided pathways. It's not a new idea. Hello? Hello? So guided pathways is not a new idea. This has been implemented and studied over a decade now. The research is very clear that guided pathways, I mean, there are various ways to measure success, and that is one, it's a political, it's an organizational decision how to define success for a particular institution. But in terms of completion rates, in terms of job placement rates, there's very clear data from schools that have implemented this type of reform that it does help increase student success.
Yeah, I was just going to add that obviously this is to increase student completion rates, and that's measurable.
Our hosts at Chicago acknowledged that they did not have any empirical evidence that demonstrated that guided pathways had improved student success. I remember that. So this is an experiment. And I understand the falsifiability idea. Karl Popper liked it, but not necessarily all scientists do. And so we could do this, or we could keep on the track that we're on, and we have to make a choice. Of course, maybe there's a third option. I don't know.
Well, at the same time, Chicago said there was no causational evidence that guided pathways resulted in the doubling of their graduation rates. Nonetheless, they had a doubling of graduation rates. So I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's the whole package of structural changes and the emphasis upon working with students from the front door to the back door, that we are very intentional in helping them stay on track on a clear, guided path. I mean, that's bottom line what it is. Yes. Shannon.
Obviously, okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Great, okay, thank you. Obviously, the advising component is critical here, and that came up in all three of your presentations. That also implies a great deal of resources in terms of time and availability of advisors. And I think that it was Chicago that mentioned the student advisor ratio. What is our student advisor ratio? And would you please refresh my memory for the three institutions again so that I have a comparison? Thanks.
Our ratio average across our campuses, counselor advisor ratio to students, is over 500 to 1.
And I think the goal of most of the colleges we spoke with was to get that down around 300 to 1. They weren't quite there, but they were working at it.
But I think another important component of that is not the ratio. It's really about the counselors and advisors really knowing those programs really well. I know that in my job every day, if somebody comes in to me and asks me about graphic design and what they want to do, I have no clue. I have to refer them back to the faculty. And I think if we have these communities, it'll make our jobs a lot more efficient, and students will leave our offices with the information they need.
So, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so one of the things that they spoke to at Sinclair that I thought was really interesting too is that not every student, so not every one of those 500 students is necessarily going to need the same amount of attention from an advisor. So they're using, data to look and see when students are off course. And so since there are peaks and valleys with advising, they use a lot of those more kind of down times for the advisors to go in, look and see who's getting off path so that they can be more intrusive or proactive with their advising. And so it kind of balances things out a little bit and gives them a better handle of the students who they do need to meet with more frequently.
The other thing that was really impressive at Sinclair along those same lines is that they have a tier system for advising: Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So Tier 1 is a student that knows exactly what they need to do. They punch in and they go all the way to graduation and don't need any advising, but they could still be on the advisor's caseload. And then they had the Tier 2, that this was a student that was, maybe their GPA was a little bit rough, or there was not a clear delineation of what they really wanted to do, so they needed a little bit more advising. And then the Tier 3 was the student that was totally lost, no clue, and maybe they were having to have more time with that student. So they really outlined a very clear way to manage the caseload, because not being an advisor, when I hear even 1 to 300, I think, how in the heck do they do that? But when they shared the way they manage it, that's the key thing, in my opinion, that was making their process be more successful and meeting the students' needs, those that need it.
Thank you all for bringing that up. I think that's hugely important. We tend to treat all students the same, and clearly they're not all the same. They need different levels of attention and assistance, and we need to do a better job of figuring out what those tiers are.
Dr. Cook, I would say that at ACC right now we have a relatively tiered system with general advising students seeing advising, and those students with higher needs are often referred to counselors. But one of the things that we saw at city colleges was the appropriate use of technology, that it's impossible to case manage even 50 students in some instances, because you're not in class with them, you don't get that feedback from their instructors, and so that integrative technology that instructors are using to feed back to advisors and counselors who's in need, what's not happening, what is happening, and we are kind of beta testing some of that stuff right now at Highland with Academia as a referral system and Inspire, but again I would say those technologies, there are two different technologies. They don't speak well with DataTel or Ellucian, or so it's not an integrated system. So in a way, there's an attempt to be efficient with the use of technology, but if our technologies aren't speaking with each other, that's more of a challenge than a help.
That's definitely a challenge we're facing. We have multiple softwares that do multiple different things, and we're trying to integrate them as best we can. And everybody has to participate. There is a role for faculty to play. There is a role for advisors to play. So everybody is going to have to become familiar with the tools. One of the great things we're doing with our Student Success course is teaching students degree map and campus to careers. They really had no formal introduction to that otherwise. And these are the ways by which they can do their career exploration, where they can do self-assessments and get a better sense of what programs might be right for them and where they might want to enroll and major. Yes.
I heard this, I think, a bit from Sinclair, and one of the things that when I've been mulling this over in my mind, of course, I'm in a health area where I have a strong degree map, but I'm thinking about those students that are the high school dropouts or whatever. What is being done in some of these institutions to help those students value higher education? It seems like that's kind of a piece that's philosophically on my part that I think has changed over time as the educational system is more available. There's a value piece that's being lost, and I don't know what the answer is to that.
Well, we actually just had a meeting with our area superintendents, and one of the things that we are urging them to do is take our student success course down into the high schools. We already require our early college high school students to take it. I think we should require our dual credit students to the extent that they need it to take it because, again, it's defining values, but that's part of the course is trying to figure out what do I value in life and how do I want to realize my values, so to speak? Missy?
I wanted to add that at one of the colleges, they actually had graphics, and it was really lovely. They would send to parents of high school students to show how much it cost to go to Sinclair and get a degree there versus going to a four-year and what it did to your career earnings over a lifetime. And it was really very, very good demonstration that even if higher ed doesn't sound like fun to you, that in terms of what you can earn over your lifetime, and that is one way that they share values. So I thought they did a really good job, and they were emailing that to parents of high school students. And I mean, it's a great way to do it.
Yeah, clearly I think all of our colleges were very engaged in college high school communication as well as college university communication to make this a seamless track for students for the whole process, not just within your institution. We have a question back here.
My question is piggybacking off of hers, simply because ACC's College Connection would take us into the various high school, and because PACE, which is inside Pflugerville ISD, is for the at-risk students who don't fit in with the regular high school. So that program helped because in the beginning when we began to go into that institution, we had 4 students that we would advise that would show up out of the whole group. When the program began to be moved in a different direction, we ended up with 15 students attending a GPS that we conducted, myself and Tong, conducted at PACE, which is in Pflugerville ISD, for those at-risk students who do not, regular school doesn't work for whatever their personal reasons are. And so did any of these institutions have something that they were doing for, because that's what she's asking, for those at-risk students, for the students who don't fit into the norm of high school?
We do have some programs in continuing education. For instance, at the Austin Can Academy, which is a dropout recovery school, we took one of our programs, the basic CNA program, Certified Nurse Aide, took it to the school. We had 17 students enroll, 17 students completed. And there's more of that. Now there's the Manor Career and Certification Center. So we have 6 programs, 6 continuing education programs in Manor. Not all these students have been identified as dropout. They're in there because they feel these programs are there's something of interest to them. They're looking for a job when they're finished, and many of these students have to work. They don't have a choice. And then we found 2 students who were interested in being aerospace engineers, and they were taking a program because they needed to work while they were going to college. But many of those students would be lost. They are not thinking, most of them are not thinking about coming to college now. And so what our job is to give them an industry certification, to get a job and then hopefully reach them and say, okay, you've done that. There's so many more opportunities for you, and ACC is the place. We've already made a connection. And so we'll have over 200 students in this school year by the end of the year that we'll be able to reach, and they're doing fantastically well. But it's a different approach to work with them. But to answer your question, yeah, they are not thinking about college.
I'm going to add something.
At this point.
I'm going to add something real quick to that, Nancy. So in Chicago, a real interesting aspect was that the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, at the time, was a big supporter of this initiative. And he said something, and I'm sure I'm paraphrasing him, but he said something to the effect of that he wanted to see job training at CCC be the best option, not the last resort for students. And I think that mentality, of course, is really important, and not just for at-risk, not just because the student's at risk, I mean for anybody. And I think that mentality really supported their connection initiative into the schools and how they dynamically shared career information and the transfer information.
Reed?
My question is dealing with advising again. You talked about faculty advising as a voluntary option at all these locations. Were there any talk about mandatory faculty advising? If not, why?
I think just the time.
While he's getting his microphone, at Miami it was, quote, voluntary, but yet they did receive recognition. Their workload was, and I don't know exactly how it equates to ours, but they had so much required professional development and our office hours and our other kinds of commitment. And by participating in the advising, it satisfied those aspects of their job requirement. I believe, I don't remember if it was Miami or Sinclair, they gave, the departments would have designated faculty advisors who got part of their course load compensated with the advising component.
And that advising could look a little different. Maybe the faculty person wasn't face-to-face with the student, but they were part of that degree plan, that career path. So they might be advising on the team or on the unit to fulfill some of that advisement requirement, but there was a requirement. It just may look a little different in an institution.
Faculty are already advising. We know that. Faculty are already advising. They're teaching their students. They're talking to them they about the workforce especially, but in academia and all of it. They're doing that. The question is, how much of this do you want them to do and where do you want them to do it? I think that needs to be delineated.
Yeah. What's the infrastructure for it? Yeah. And, those are things we'll have to discuss and try to figure out.
It seemed to me that one of the underlying ideas was the students selecting a community or program coming in, a meta major. My question for the presenters is, can anyone enumerate any downside to doing so, be it in terms of awareness of lifespan development or student academic freedom or any other thing? Is there any downside that anybody can think of?
Again, as talking as a scientist, okay, so the data is very clear in the psychological community that people are overloaded with choices. And so it's not about taking away choice. It's about giving default mechanisms. If you're familiar with the nudge by Cass Sunstein and forget his co-author, but nudge, which is behavioral economics. It's not about taking away choice. It's about making default choices for people. And those people that want to choose and do something different, they have that option too, but they have to actively engage that freedom. Rather than making freedom the default option for everyone, that can be often overwhelming psychologically for a lot of people. So we're not taking away freedom. We're simply providing a default mechanism that helps those students that need further direction and intrusive kind of people making decisions for them. Some people need that. Other students, they want that freedom. They want to engage that freedom. That's still an option. They just have to actively engage that option and choose to do so.
Yeah.
Could I ask about downsides?
Dan, since you specifically asked about downsides, what I see is a student who radically changes direction. Then, yes, they have accrued excess credits. It does kind of cut out that traditional mindset of college as an exploratory time to find out what you want to do. I think the goal of these is to get students on a good path for them, hopefully the right path, but as they go, they'll find that out. So I think the downside is that there is some exploration built into some of these pathways, so it's not a penalizing thing. So you find out, oh, I hate business after you take your first semester or whatever, so there's some built in.
We actually did talk about that at Sinclair because it does take away from the college exploration, whereas a lot of people in this room may have started out thinking they wanted one career path and they actually changed. The thing at Sinclair that they did make known was, although it would cut out some of that exploration, with so many underprepared and underrepresented students now in community colleges, it's very proactive and very needed, however, to help them not get to 3 years and have 5 credits that they didn't need, or have them having to withdraw because they've exceeded their financial aid and things of that nature. So in terms of cutting out the explanation, it does help, however, or hurt rather. However, in the long term, in the long run, it is very sufficient and needed that we do give our students, and at Sinclair, they literally have the degree map so that they're exiting to their major colleges, their major four-year universities, and actually pairing with the companies within their community. So it's actually helping, but yes, there can be downfalls to it.
Really quickly, one of the things that we're dealing with now is also the financial aid aspect of it. Financial aid is limited. It's not the same that it was when I went to college, where we take the same class over and over again until I got an A on it. Not that I ever did. Sure. But that is an issue that comes up. When I see a student in my office, I got to juggle multiple majors, multiple universities, and deal with financial aid. Psychology at UT uses a different math than psychology at Texas State. So in different routes to go through it. So we have to expedite it and get them on the path that's going to get them where they need to go. Can they explore? Yes, but it's going to come at a price that they have to pay for classes out of their own pockets at some point.
One of the things Miami did that I thought was interesting is that their required online orientation was where they selected their meta major, and then their face-to-face orientation was actually like an information session about what are the careers available within this meta major, what are the majors within this meta major, so that it was providing a lot of this very intentional information up front to help inform the decision, so that people do have better information, as opposed to just right now, our students are putting their major on our application, but we're finding out overwhelmingly it's done sort of blindly and typically wrong. So we have to be more intentional with our students to help them make better decisions. Tobin.
He's got a mic.
Well, I wanted to make the observation that there were a lot of really great ideas, and one that's sticking with me, I think, is exciting and at the same time could be, among some people, kind of inflammatory. And so I wonder if we can get some examples clarifying. I get how faculty can have a broader role in advising. But some of my colleagues are going to say, what are we talking about with advisors now teaching? And I just wonder, what examples did you see of that, so that when I'm having those conversations with other faculty members, I can help them understand what we're really saying when we're talking about faculty teaching.
Advisors teaching.
Advisors teach.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Who has our microphone?
It's essentially what you're doing in the student success. I mean, you're teaching a student how to be a student. I mean, that's what advisors
You're
need
not
to teach.
teaching subject matter.
Yeah, I mean, you're teaching life skills, you're teaching study skills, you're teaching stress management skills, you're teaching a student how to be a successful human being, how to be a successful student. And so that's the teaching component. That,
And in addition to that, I think the advisors teach is also advisors teaching them how to make informed choices. So just being available to provide that information and inform the student about how they can use this information to make the choices best for them. So
And how to find the information.
and how to find it, yeah.
And just one last thing, it's not necessarily formal teaching. So that may be the distinction.
I really think the value of having some direction when students come in is very important, and I'm wondering if we might be using or need to be using like Focus 2 and Success Navigator or the non-cognitive assessments before they make a choice for a mega path, a pathway, so that they do have some data from their own interests, values, experiences, and all of that abilities to help them orient towards a path. And that then could be reinforced later on with more detailed advising, but otherwise, you know, just making a choice between 5 or 7 or 9 could still be that sort of uninformed choice. So if we could build those assessments in early on and then pursue them later, I think that could be helpful.
Wasn't that part of the 2-day orientation at Chicago?
Right. I think that would be very helpful.
Week-long summer boot camp.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things that city colleges did was you can look at their credentials and you can see with the data-driven information, you can see if you get certificate A, this is the job that you'll have, these are jobs available, these are the number of jobs that are out there, and these are the rates of the pay. And I thought that was extremely helpful in a student that's coming in that really didn't know where they wanted to go, but they know their economic needs, and then they can decide based upon that. They look in the second degree, they can see these are the different positions that you can advance to, and then how the pay increases.
And Tobin, to speak to your question, Miami-Dade does include that sort of non-cognitive assessment, that career assessment, as part of their application process.
Yeah, I would say in all the schools that we looked at, there was more intentionality about making a decision before classes were selected. Sometimes it was part of the orientation, like City Colleges has on their website some resources that do that assessment, and they can come in and speak with someone before they're selecting their focus area. But that orientation really, it focused intentionally on informed decision making and letting them know there's career planning and placement, there's resources. They also use Focus 2. So.
And, you know, adding to that is, I think, that continuous tracking. You check in with the student continuously with each registration. It shows you're a psychology major. Is that your intention? To make sure that they still are on the right path. They might have changed their mind, so catching that as early as possible to then get them back in the right path.
At Miami-Dade, they do intrusive advising. How intrusive is that advising, and how do the professionals at the school share that information without violating a student's privacy?
Can y'all hear me? Are we good? The intrusive advising at Miami-Dade is off that 40 non-cognitive questionnaire. So they ask things like, do you need childcare? Do you have reliable transportation? Do you have housing? Do you have food? Things of that nature. For the most part, it's just between the advisor and the student. So you're not sharing all that information other than the resources that student may need. So I don't know if that answers your question. Kind of, sort of.
She was next.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily just intrusive advising. It's more intrusive assessment. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add on? Just a quick addition to that. I think they called it intrusive advising simply because they had students report on these issues and that non-cognitive assessment prior to coming to campus. And so the advisors were actually prepared when they met with the student to actually talk about those issues that came up on their profile. So it was intrusive in that the student didn't have to sit in front of the advisor and say, I don't have childcare. They already had that documented, and they reached out to the student to try to provide information and resources.
It's actually a technical term. It's actually a technical term within the literature. That it's getting into the students' lives. Rather than assuming the student is going to tell you what they need, you assume the student is not going to tell you what you need, and you need to pull it out of them. Essentially is what intrusive is. Yeah, proactive.
So one of the pieces that I was really impressed with at Chicago was their use of data. So their use of data was not on the end to do an annual report or something of that nature on a semester basis. It was live, real-time data. And their deans, campus deans, and lead counselors, lead advisors would look at this data and see how many students are on early alert, what subject is the flag one coming through, what departments do we need to be working with, at what point in the semester are students struggling the most. So this data was helpful for that intrusive advising. Call the student in live time, not after the fact.
One quick point that I want to make on that too. Just because we're all very intense about this. So at Sinclair, the aspect of intrusive advising came across in a stat that they gave us. 10 contacts per student per semester. That's what they're averaging on all their students. Those contacts can include both academic advising, faculty advising, the live orientation, the student ambassadors that are helping out with advising and counseling. So that kind of intrusive advising where everybody takes a turn at advising students.
We'll take one more question because we are, well, two more since we have two hands in the air. But we are at 4 o'clock. I do want to respect people's time.
I can see that I can see that the time with the student spends with advisors would be a lot more than is currently being done at ACC with it either face-to-face or with the orientation. And I would like to ask if any of the 3 institutions that you visited, if that impact the registration period, because here at ACC we have so many students that aren't registering until the last few days of registration, or even now after registration closed and we have the dereg and we open it up. So I was wondering if do these institutions also have registration periods that are right up to the start of classes?
At Chicago, they had a closing date for registration, and it was about a week out to resolve that. But I would say that on the front end, their systems with the orientation and registration process did not create that effect. So if you're dealing with those things up front and consolidating services and processes, then you're not registering at the last minute. So some of our issues are caused by the process itself, taking weeks to complete.
Just to expand on that, one thing that they did, which seemed really unusual, they really expanded the pathway into actually having multiple semester enrollment, where you could actually enroll for a semester ahead your classes. So I know all of us know our schedule that far ahead of time, but as far as expanding the depth of the pathway and keeping people on a pathway, that's pretty dynamic, and predictive. Yes.
Cheryl?
Hi, from Student Life. We are the Classroom Without Walls, and we spend the majority of our time working with our students with soft skills, developing those soft skills. I haven't heard any of you speak about the relationship between the new program direction that we're going and Student Life, and how those soft skills and leadership development will come into play in this particular programming adventure. Vanessa?
Thank you, Cheryl. So as Cheryl said, we work a lot with first-time in college students and students of all ages, particularly in soft skills, whether it is day-to-day soft skills that they're developing, but also professional soft skills. And many of the things that we're talking about here, that having clarity of purpose, students have to be able to function, they have to be able to have clarity of purpose, and they got to know how they're going to get there. And so the intrusive advising that we're talking about and all the things that we're doing collaboratively is working to get them through those stages. And so I think that what we're seeing here through Guided Pathways and where we're moving forward is getting them through those stages, but as a team. And then each of us is playing a specific role in ensuring that we get them through those stages. So that intrusive advising piece is taking care of that personal soft skill. You know, we're talking about the teaching. You know, how do I set my goals? What is my clarity of purpose? And having those conversations, but also building a positive rapport with those students to where they feel connected and find relevance as to why they are here. And so that's the advising portion of it, but the faculty portion as well, and even student services staff, all of us, you know, coming together and identifying what is our role, what is our responsibility, and then taking action towards that is what we're moving towards. And that's what we're doing with Guided Pathways. I'm sure I could probably have someone provide a little bit more clarity.
Cheryl, the communities of interest at Miami were essentially the student life department, and dividing those student life activities along the lines of the pathways so that they were accommodating the students in those different communities.
And Charles, can you hear me? Mike, so if you go to Malcolm X College and you're homeless, you can go to whichever office, I'm sorry, which offices?
Wellness Center.
Wellness, right. They'll give you a clean set of clothes, and they'll hook you up with a community organization that will help you find a home and permanently get clothes and so forth. So that is a way of interacting with someone who is nurturing rather than just giving you grades, A, F, D, D minus, blah, blah, blah. It is very concrete ways of getting those soft skills.
And I'll just continue to add on. But Dr. Cook mentioned the communities of interest at Miami-Dade. And in their particular case, the communities of interest were separate from student life. But when you describe your area as the classroom without walls, that's exactly what they're creating. They're creating the classroom without walls that's, you know, kind of specialized to each of those meta majors. And so they are developing within their pathways those opportunities for leadership, those opportunities for service, and the opportunities for engagement. So it's definitely there, and certainly we saw Miami-Dade kind of organizing the same sort of programming activities and opportunities for students within the meta majors.
You definitely will have a role to play. Thank you all. Let me tell you briefly our next step. We're going to be working with our group to come up with their written report, which they will present again to anyone who wants to come listen in December. I forgot, December 10th. And they will have recommendations as to the next step. That's not necessarily what exactly we'll do, but at least they are going to be tasked with presenting recommendations to us. So we will take those and share it broadly with the entire college community. Christina? Oh, sorry. December 17th. Okay. 17th? Okay. Maybe you better check the website for the latest, greatest. The website also has a form for anybody to fill out to give us input, and we welcome any and all input. Obviously, this is going to be very complicated going forward, and we want your advice. Marvy?
3 sets?
One set. Yeah. Each of the college teams had people looking at connection, entry, progress, and completion. So they'll use their different perspectives to come up with recommendations for us in each of those areas. Okay, thank you all. Very good. That was a great job.